She thought it was just another break at the diner until the stranger she shared her table with turned out to be a billionaire, with a secret that would flip her entire world. Behind the clatter of dishes and fake smiles, someone was watching, and he wasn't just here for lunch. What he does next, no one saw coming. The lunch rush was just starting to slow, but Madison Lane felt like she'd already run a marathon. Her sneakers squeaked faintly on the worn linoleum as she refilled the sugar caddy for the third time that day. The scent of burnt bacon and cheap coffee clung to her like a second skin. Her ponytail, hastily tied at 6 a.m., was now a tired mess falling against the back of her neck. She didn't mind. At least it kept her hair out of the eggs. "Hey, Mads, you good?" her co-worker Jenna asked, passing by with a tray of pancakes. Madison forced a tired smile. Good enough. She wasn't. Her feet ached. Tips had been light all week, and her manager had already warned her. Another late clock-in and her hours were getting slashed. But she wasn't about to unload all that right now. Not while she had 3 tables waiting for ketchup. During her 10-minute break, she grabbed her mug, coffee lukewarm and bitter, and dropped into her usual corner booth, the one near the window. She sat alone, hunched over like the weight of the week was pushing down on her spine. Rain drizzled outside, making the diner's neon sign smear into the glass like a tired watercolor. Then a shadow. Someone hovered beside the table, a man in a gray coat, worn leather gloves still on his hands. He looked out of place, clean-shaven, quiet eyes, expensive shoes too polished for this part of town. Madison glanced up, startled but polite. "You mind if I sit?" he asked, voice low, calm. She blinked. Most folks didn't ask. "No." Yeah, sure," she said, scooting her coffee mug slightly to the side. "I mean, it's a free country, right?" He smiled faintly and slid into the booth across from her without another word. Madison watched him for a moment, curious. He wasn't reading a paper or scrolling his phone. Just sitting, looking out the window like he'd been thinking for a long time and hadn't found an answer yet. "Not from around here?" she asked, mostly just to fill the silence. "Passing through," he said, then paused. "It's a quiet place. Until someone orders the chili," she joked, a weak smirk tugging at the edge of her lips. He actually chuckled, soft and surprised. That sound made something shift, small but real. Madison wasn't used to being the reason someone laughed like that. They sat in comfortable quiet for a few moments. The diner hummed around them, forks clinking, conversations buzzing, a baby crying somewhere near the back. The man finally asked, "You always this nice to strangers?" She shrugged. "You looked like you needed a seat." "I've been there." He nodded like he understood more than she meant to share. But Madison didn't ask his name, and he didn't offer it, because for her, it was just a tired break in a long day. And for him, it was the beginning of something he'd been searching for. The bell above the front door jingled as a gust of wind swept in another customer. Madison stood, quietly sliding her coffee aside. Break time was over. Back on her feet, she moved table to table with practiced ease, dropping menus, topping off coffees, pretending her joints didn't hurt and her mind wasn't wandering back to the quiet stranger in the corner booth. She caught him once, watching her, not in a weird way, but like he was studying something no one else seemed to notice. "Refill on 2, Jenna whispered, nodding toward a booth where a grumpy man in a windbreaker tapped his mug like it owed him money. "On it," Madison said, grabbing the pot with a forced smile. "Welcome to paradise," she muttered under her breath. As she poured, the windbreaker guy didn't say thank you, just grunted. Same as yesterday. Back at the counter, her manager, Rick, leaned over a clipboard, chewing his pen cap like it owed him money. He didn't even glance up as he said, "Mads, you were late again this morning. One more time, and I'm pulling your double on Fridays." Madison froze for a second. "It was 5 minutes, Rick." "My bus. Bus ain't my problem," he cut in. "Business is tight. I need people I can count on." She clenched her jaw, then nodded silently. Nothing else to say. The "I'm trying" stuck somewhere in her throat. Later, she stood by the register, thumbing through a few measly bills in the tip jar. $5, maybe 6. Rent was due in 4 days. Electric soon after. Her stomach sank, even as she smiled through another customer's order. Back at her corner booth, the stranger was still there, slowly working through a bowl of soup. He glanced up as she passed by, offering a gentle nod. "You get breaks like that often?" he asked softly. Madison let out a tired laugh. 10 minutes every 6 hours. If we're lucky. Long enough to wonder what you're doing with your life, not long enough to change it. He seemed to absorb that. His gaze wasn't pitiful, it was curious, present, like he actually heard her. "You ever think about doing something else?" he asked. Madison froze, then looked away. Her voice came quieter this time. "Used to. Not everyone gets the chance." She moved on before he could respond. Behind the counter, Rick barked out again. "Table 4 is waiting, Madison. Move it." The moment was gone. Just another day. Another dollar that wouldn't stretch far enough. But the man still watched her, not with judgment, not even with sympathy. With purpose. The rain hadn't let up. Outside the diner window, it dripped steadily down the glass in quiet trails, muting the world into gray. Inside, the pace had picked up again, the early dinner crowd rolling in. Families, couples, a handful of lonely regulars clinging to routine. Madison's steps had quickened. She was 3 tables behind and hadn't eaten since a muffin at sunrise. Her hands moved on autopilot. Menu, water, silverware, smile, but her mind was somewhere else. It kept drifting back to him. The man in the booth. Still there. Still watching. Still calm. He wasn't just killing time. He'd ordered the same soup twice. Drank water like he had nowhere else to be. And he never once looked at a phone. That alone made him stand out more than his shoes or his coat. Madison dropped a plate at table 6, meatloaf, extra mashed potatoes, and forced a grin at the older couple who barely noticed her. Then, without thinking too much about it, she drifted back toward the booth. "You really must like the soup," she said, setting down a fresh napkin. He glanced up, faint smile returning. "I like the quiet here." She gave a tired laugh. "You and I must be hearing different diners." He leaned forward a little, voice warm, but even. "You handle all of this pretty gracefully, especially under pressure." The compliment landed in a place she didn't expect, soft but deep. "No one's ever called me graceful while I was carrying gravy," she said, but it stuck. The way he said it didn't feel like small talk. "You from here?" he asked. "Born and raised." She leaned her weight against the booth edge. "Almost left once. Got offered a scholarship for business school in Chicago. But my mom got sick. I stayed." He nodded slowly. "That couldn't have been easy." She shrugged, eyes flicking toward the back. "Life isn't always about easy. Sometimes it's just about staying upright." They were quiet again for a second, and in that silence, something shifted. Madison didn't usually talk about her past. People didn't ask. And when they did, it always came with pity. This felt different. Like the stranger saw her, and not just the tired waitress in a stained apron, but the version of her she used to believe in. Before she could say more, Rick's voice cut through the air. "Madison, you gonna stand there all night or actually work your section?" Her spine straightened. The spell broke. She offered the man a quick, apologetic smile and walked away without another word. But as she turned, the man's expression darkened, not angry, but sharper now. He pulled out a small notebook and quietly jotted something down, just beneath the edge of the table. And for the first time since he'd entered the diner, his eyes weren't just curious. They were calculating. The buzz in the diner had picked up. Spoons clinked against ceramic bowls. Someone laughed too loudly near the jukebox. Steam fogged the kitchen window where orders came flying out, one after the next. Madison was falling behind. Her ponytail clung to the back of her neck now, sweat beading at her temples. Table 3 hadn't gotten their drinks. Table 5 was asking for extra ranch for the 3rd time. And the fryer was down again. She grabbed 2 plates, double cheeseburger and a grilled cheese with no crust, and balanced them expertly on her forearm as she hurried across the floor. Behind her, Rick barked out, "You're moving like molasses lane. People are waiting." Madison bit her tongue. Across the room, the stranger, the man in the gray coat, watched it all unfold. Still seated in the same corner booth, still quiet, still watching. As she dropped the plates at table 6, a customer raised his voice. "This isn't what I ordered." Madison turned, confused. "You asked for the turkey club, no tomato." The man held up his plate like it was evidence. "This has tomato, and no bacon. Do you even listen?" She flushed, stammered. I can have it fixed, sir, right away." "I'm sorry." Before she could grab the plate, Rick stepped in, too loud and too fast. "You see, this is exactly what I've been dealing with," he said, arms crossed as he turned to the entire restaurant. "Some of us care about customer service. Others? They just float by." Madison stood frozen, cheeks burning, eyes on the floor. The room got quiet. No one spoke. The only sound was a spoon falling onto a saucer nearby. The customer snorted and shoved the plate forward. "Forget it. I've lost my appetite." Rick turned to Madison, eyes narrow but said nothing more. Just shook his head and walked off. She stood still for another beat, then carefully picked up the plate and walked it back into the kitchen. Behind her, the stranger's gaze lingered, focused, intent. In the back, by the swinging doors, Madison leaned against the counter, her hands shaking. She didn't cry. She never cried at work. But her throat was tight, and that feeling, that awful, cold feeling of being small, pressed hard against her chest. Jenna peeked around the corner. "You okay?" "Yeah." Madison sniffed and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "It's fine. You want me to run your orders for a minute?" "No, I'm good." Jenna nodded, hesitated, then ducked back out. Madison took a slow breath. Just get through today. She'd been through worse. She always got back up. She pushed the door open and stepped back into the noise. But something was different. The stranger wasn't eating anymore. He was sitting straighter now, watching Rick closely as the manager disappeared into the back office. And when his eyes turned to Madison, they weren't just kind anymore. They were decisive. The rain had finally stopped, but the sky outside stayed a dull gray, like the clouds weren't ready to give up completely. Madison stood outside the diner's back door, her apron tucked under one arm, her breath visible in the cool air. A half-lit security lamp buzzed above her, casting shadows along the damp brick wall. She leaned against it, head back, eyes closed. Her hands were still trembling. The door creaked open. Jenna stepped out, holding 2 styrofoam cups. "Figured you could use some coffee that doesn't taste like burnt socks." Madison gave a half-hearted chuckle, taking 1 cup. "You're an angel." They stood quietly for a moment, steam curling into the air between them. "You gonna be okay?" Jenna finally asked, gentle but direct. Madison hesitated. Then the truth slipped out before she could stop it. "I don't know." She stared at the pavement. "I used to think this was temporary," she said softly. "Just a few months here while I figured things out. Then Mom got sick and I couldn't leave. So I stayed. Gave up school. Gave up everything, really." Jenna listened, eyes soft. "I told myself I'd try again later," Madison continued. "But later became never. And now I'm just stuck. Working doubles, apologizing for things I didn't do, letting Rick humiliate me like I don't have a spine. And for what? $40 in tips and a manager who treats me like I'm invisible until I mess up." She swallowed hard. "I feel like I failed. Like the best parts of me got buried under all this." Jenna reached over and gently touched her shoulder. "You didn't fail. You sacrificed. That's not the same." Madison nodded but didn't speak. The words hung heavy in the air, too close to the bone. From the alleyway, just beyond the dumpster, someone stood quietly in the shadows, unseen. The man in the gray coat. He'd followed quietly after paying his check. Watched her step outside. Listened to her speak. He didn't come closer. He didn't say a word. But in that moment, his mind was made up. Back inside, Rick laughed loudly from the office, probably watching something on his phone, oblivious to the wreckage he left behind. But change was already moving. Quiet. Unseen. And Madison Lane had no idea that her tired truth, spoken in the dark behind a diner, had just rewritten her future. The diner smelled like bacon and fresh coffee again, but something was off. It wasn't the usual chaos Madison walked into the next morning. It was quiet. Not the good kind. The kind that made you feel like everyone knew something you didn't. She stepped through the front door, tying her apron mid-step, and glanced around. Jenna stood near the bulletin board, brows raised, half smiling. A few regulars whispered over their toast. Even Rick's usual barking voice was nowhere to be heard. "What's going on?" Madison asked, instantly on alert. Jenna just nodded toward the board. Madison walked over, her eyes landing on a crisp, white sheet of paper, typed, signed, and thumbtacked above the weekly shift schedule. Her name was right there in the first line. She read it once, then again. To the staff of Milltown Diner. "Yesterday, I visited your restaurant unannounced. I do this often. Quietly. I prefer to observe how businesses run when no one is watching. What I saw disturbed me, but it also moved me. One of your waitresses, Madison Lane, reminded me of something I'd forgotten in all my years behind boardroom walls. Grace under pressure, strength without ego, and kindness even when it's undeserved. I've made a decision. Effective immediately. This location is under new operational leadership. Your manager, Rick, has been released. Hours will be reviewed. Staffing will be supported. And most importantly, those who show up every day with integrity will be treated with the respect they've earned. Thank you, Madison. You inspired this change." Jonathan M. Hart, CEO, Hart & Company, Hospitality Group. Madison's hands trembled as she finished reading. Her eyes scanned the signature again. Jonathan M. Hart. Her lips parted slightly. The man in the booth. Jenna stepped beside her, eyes wide. "You shared your table with a billionaire." The words didn't quite land. It felt surreal, like the world had tilted slightly and hadn't corrected itself yet. "Rick's really gone?" Madison asked, voice barely above a whisper. Jenna nodded. "Packed up before you even got here. Didn't say a word." In the back, the kitchen staff had stopped clanking pans. Heads peeked around corners. Someone clapped softly, then louder. A few more joined in. Not for the billionaire. For her. Madison stood frozen. For the first time in a long time, the silence around her wasn't empty, it was full. Full of respect, of acknowledgement, and maybe something even deeper. Hope. Outside the diner, across the street, a dark SUV waited. The back window rolled down just enough for a pair of thoughtful eyes to glimpse the scene inside. The stunned girl at the bulletin board, the team rallying around her. Jonathan Hart smiled faintly. Then the window rolled back up, and the car pulled away into the gray morning. Madison stood in front of the bulletin board, eyes still locked on the letter, her heart pounding in quiet disbelief. The room around her had returned to motion. Orders were taken, eggs sizzled, laughter bubbled in bursts, but something had changed. She had changed. She wasn't invisible anymore. Jenna leaned in, teasing but gentle. "Guess you made an impression, huh?" Madison let out a breathy laugh. "I just let him sit down." "No," Jenna said, tapping the letter with her finger. "You showed him who you are." The word stuck. Soft but powerful. Who you are. For the first time in years, Madison felt something shift deep in her chest. It wasn't pride, not exactly. It was relief. Like she didn't have to explain herself anymore. Like maybe staying behind had meant something after all. She moved through the diner slowly now, not dragging her feet, but steady. The regulars looked at her differently, not as just the waitress who brought them refills, but like they saw her. Even Mr. Windbreaker, Grumpy Table 4, offered a tight nod. It was small, but it was everything. At the end of her shift, she untied her apron and stepped outside. The rain had passed, and the sky had opened just enough for a sliver of gold to peek through the clouds. She stood there on the sidewalk, bathed in soft morning light, clutching the folded letter in her hand like a lifeline. Her life hadn't magically changed. Rent was still due. The bills would still come. But something inside her was new. Because someone powerful, someone who could have walked past her like everyone else, chose to see her. And more than that, he acted on it. All because she offered him a seat. Just one small act of kindness. And that kindness had found its way back to her, quietly, like sunlight after a storm. Final line. She didn't chase success. She showed up for life. And life, finally, showed up for her.